From what I've read, this magazine has its origins in a question. The question being, and I'll paraphrase here, how come a city as vital and as fascinating as LA doesn't or didn't have an outlet for its vital, interesting stories? And we have one answer right here in the form of the stack of issues, these 3 issues so far that I'm tapping now. But the question itself is pretty valid, I think, as a question. Why was there not one before Slake?
Well, your question would presume that Slake has answered that question fully, and I'm not sure it has. But but thank you, yeah. But appreciate it. We're trying. Laurie will have a lot to add to this as well because she has experience in New York, and as did I as a newspaper journalist. But I think a lot of it is the center of publishing has long been in New York, and it's just sort of received knowledge that to be vital in publishing, you have to be in New York. I think that's changing a little bit. Certainly, San Francisco has created the Bay Area has created a small scene up there with McSweeney's and Rumpus and Wired and other things like that. And LA is a different kind of place. It's a lot of its energy has gone into other media like film and television and gaming. Lots of creative stuff that's just in a different type of medium. But we're really hoping that LA is too big, too diverse, too exciting, too dynamic, has too many really talented writers and artists, and particularly, the artists, the art scene here is really bringing a lot of attention to LA's creative capital, and it can't be pigeonholed as a film and television town. There's just too much going on. So we're hoping we're at critical mass there, where it's time to start a really great print and media scene here. Also, it's 21st century. It's kind of LA's century. This is where all the, as we've said before, this is where really the privileges and the burdens of the 21st century are really, really, taking place here. They're in action here. All the association with Latin America and the Pacific Rim, and really where the future is. It's really going on here. The questions of how do you integrate very different types of cultures and ethnic populations in a big hopefully melting pot, but also in in an urban environment that could become, either point to the way we do this in the future, or it could become Calcutta. It's really, walking that line. So we all have a role to play in how we go about that. I know I'm blabbering on, and you can cut this, but let me just finish this one thing. I was at a neighborhood council meeting, Echo Park neighborhood council meeting earlier this week, and there were a lot of business proposals that were, up for review by a committee, and lots of different interests there. And it's really interesting just at one of those small venues to see the just widespread collection of different interests that gather in this small place and in this small population among 30 people, that there's just every sort of interest represented there. And you can see you can actually watch transition happening in those meetings, and in an hour and a half you can sort of get a glimpse of the whole mishmash of what's taking place in the city. And it's really kind of encouraging. It's actually encouraging to go there and see that there is some common civic interest, and you can see it in venues like that, even if it isn't appearing on your big screen.
I think this is the perfect time for us to come out with something like Slake, because I keep thinking back to when I was at the Los Angeles Times in the late 90s, and the editor of the paper, Michael Parks, used to say, Los Angeles is the capital of the 21st century, and he wanted the Los Angeles Times to be that paper for that capital. And at the time, people would bristle a little bit when he said that, and people would still think about New York, as the center of publishing. And
I thought I invented that thing.
but now I believe that if Michael or the editor of the LA Times were to say that now, no one would bristle as much. It's not something that makes people uncomfortable anymore. I think they see that happening. More and more people coming here from all over. I mean, people have always come in here, but there's just a good critical mass of writing talent, and then I think also with the industry changing so much, it's a time that Joe and I could do something that for the first time we don't really have to think about commercial interests or formats. We spent our careers at the Times, at the LA Weekly, Condé Nast magazines, Joe being editor, starting up magazines. But in each of those magazines, and even in the very first, considerations of what Slake could be, there were very commercial ideas. And it's interesting that the way that the economy is, and the way that kind of us being free to think about, well, what would we do if we could do anything we wanted, that this is a way of showing people, well, here is like a one issue that has, 20 weeks of LA Weekly covers, not just one. So when we were at the Weekly, we would, work very hard to tell the story of Los Angeles in many different ways. And it was a great format when we were there to tell those stories and have maybe 2 or 3 feature stories, but then have a lot of pages with calendar, which is very useful. But with this, it's all feature stories. It's all as Joe likes to say, all killer, no filler. And we get to do things like have poetry and fiction, but that also tells the story of Los Angeles. I really think of this as a new kind of city magazine. It's a different way of looking at Los Angeles through the eyes of reporters who can tell narrative, do narrative reporting, through poets, through fiction writers who look at the city in different ways. It is not just the daily breaking news way of looking at the city, or even just a quick magazine way, but a way that will last, and that you can pick this up in 10 years and know the story of Los Angeles at a certain point, and it won't feel dated. It'll just say, oh, this is what it was like to live in Los Angeles then.
There's also something interesting here as well, is typically what we're doing here has been in the purview of not-for-profit types of publications. And while we're certainly haven't approached anything close to profit, in fact, it's a big money loser right now, there's something about the aesthetic feel and just the vibrancy of it that I think is part of it not being a not-for-profit. And I haven't quite been able to figure out why or what that is, but we've been sort of resistant and reluctant about turning into a not-for-profit because when I look at the other journals, there's a lack of, I guess sometimes there's a lack of lead in their pencil, to use a really. But I'm speaking about writing, of course. Yes. Yeah. That just turns me off. Where am I going with this? I feel like there's a vibrancy that comes from not being pressured either from the commercial side or from the completely non-commercial side, where there are other interests that you have to answer to as well. So there's interests on both sides that end up having an effect on the publication, and we're kind of freewheeling in the middle space through all that, where we don't have to either answer to a board who has their interests, or to advertisers, or not that we'd ever answer to advertisers, but just to commercial interest, to try to present something that is more commercially viable than what we're doing, I guess.
Our mission is good storytelling. So it's, even though we do want to do things, we go to schools and talk to kids and we'll do workshops and that sort of thing. But our main purpose is to put good storytelling out there. And also to what Joe was saying a little bit is that as much as we like many literary magazines that are out there, we don't think of ourselves as a pure literary magazine because we are trying to tell the story of Los Angeles right now. And so that is where some of the urgency in some of the stories comes through. So even though some of the stories might fit very well in another literary magazine, some of the fiction pieces, we put together a mix of stories. So for instance, in our third issue, War and Peace, that kind of fits with the mood of what we're thinking about in the months that we're putting these things together. And that tells the story of a time and place.
Yeah, we don't just want to take you to the museum. We want to fuck you after. Right?
Sure.
From KCSB in Santa Barbara and Colin Marshall Radio, I'm Colin Marshall. This is the Marketplace of Ideas, and I'm sitting down today with Laurie Ochoa and Joe Donnelly. They are the founding editors of Slake, the new, I guess, impure literary magazine of Los Angeles. It's on its third issue now, War and Peace, and it has fiction, essays, and photography, visual art of many kinds. And we're sitting here, in fact, in these Slake offices in Los Angeles, and sitting here thinking about the city, hearing what you guys are saying. Specifically what you said, Joe, about the difference between this and...
Want to fuck you?
Oh, sure, of course. Now it's two bleeps. Now it's two bleeps I'm going to have to put in post. But thinking about the difference between the sort of academic literary journals, the non-academic ones, the commercial magazines, and this place between them, I don't think I'm going to surprise anybody when I say, a lot of literary journals, like you alluded to, are a little bit dour, a little bit rye bread, shall we say, when they're trying to get away from what they might call commercialism. And it seems to me, now I'm going to say something grand, so tell me your impressions here, that something like Slake, which, for lack of a better word, is more exciting than those magazines, it reminds me of the way that in LA, even the academy in LA is not, it doesn't feel academic. You know what I mean? Like the type of stereotype academic dryness, it doesn't take root so well in a place like Los Angeles. What do you think about that?
Well, I think LA is sexy, and that's kind of what I was alluding to. It's smart and sexy, and funny, and you can have all that. There's a lot of great cities with that offer a lot of great things. But here I find that there's no stereotype that applies here. And there's no overarching dogma that you have to adhere to, such as I have experienced in some other places I've lived.
He said Berkeley, listeners. Now, this is important because I've just moved to LA, and one of the main reasons for my liking LA enough to move there is that and again, something grand, correct me if this sounds too ridiculous at any point, but in New York, in Berkeley, in Paris, there are ideal versions of the city that exist in people's imagination, sometimes multiple ones, but the cities always have to live up to the icons of themselves. And there are individual icons of LA, mostly to do with old Hollywood, I think, but there's no ideal LA in people's minds that the city must be. Do you think that's right or wrong? Well,
I think there is an ideal version of LA in people's minds, but it's about the future, not the past. Yeah. So in Paris, people love and feel very nostalgic and going to old places, and New York as well. And you're right that there are icons of old Hollywood and Los Angeles too, but I find that most people are always thinking about what Los Angeles could be, and that's really exciting. I think that's one of the reasons a lot of people are drawn here, because they see there's so much to do.
That's a really intelligent answer. Can you make sure that's recorded?
Oh, it's recorded.
Okay. I don't have anything that I can add to that. No, I mean, I think the ideals of LA are caricaturish, and it's funny, we could point to 2 Woody Allen movies. The recent one, what was that one? Midnight in Paris or something? Yeah, Midnight in Paris, where it's all about nostalgia. And then is it Annie Hall, where he comes out to LA and, it's just full of, or is it Manhattan? Annie Hall? It's Annie Hall, right? Anyway, everyone's vapid and, neither of those, but both of those movies sort of point to what Laurie's saying. There's only a past nostalgia with certain cities, or there's a vapid caricature of Los Angeles, which is nothing like how I've experienced it, and it's not like how most of the people I know have experienced it. And the other ideals that are associated with LA, that the weather is going to be nice, is pretty much we can live up to that.
Listeners will remember a past guest on this show, especially LA listeners, John Raby, host of Off Ramp on KPCC, who told his story of moving to LA from Minneapolis, Minnesota. And he didn't say this on the show, but he's told me, I think I'm not crossing a line by saying he in Minneapolis found people were not very receptive to the idea of LA. In fact, thought that they brought out the usual, the LA, I can't do the accent, but I'll say, they said, LA, you can't go there. The people are phony. And apparently they had a big thing about sunglasses, like they all wear sunglasses, and they, none of them know what family or community is. A lot of this. And I wonder, how much is it in your mind to refute stereotypes of LA with a project like Slake, or is it just incidental that they kind of get refuted?
I don't think we need to set the goal to refute stereotypes. I think we just are. I mean, I always think about what people say about the relationship between Los Angeles and San Francisco. I mean, at least they used to say this, where people in San Francisco put a lot of energy into hating Los Angeles, and people in Los Angeles would say, I love San Francisco. It's a great place to visit. We love going there. Right. And just not think about, not put a lot of energy into worrying about what people think of us. I think you go astray when you try to prove yourself too hard.
It's the same as New York, It's like, man, I love New York. I'm glad it's there.
Yeah.
And that's something I want to get a little deeper into, this sort of one-way rivalries LA has. And because, everybody I talk to, and including myself, San Francisco, great. New York, great. Chicago, great. Fun to visit. I'll still come back to LA, but these are all not places I would feel compelled to hate because I don't live in them. And there's a certain element of LA I sense. LA doesn't need you to like it, because it's still going to keep rolling. And I mean, New York would keep rolling if you hated it, but there seems to be a feeling like, but you need to like it. What's the difference here?
I don't know. One thing Los Angeles will do is chew you up and spit you out if you're insecure, I think that's part of it. If you're not grounded to a certain extent in yourself and comfortable, it can chew. Let's be real. It's a tough city. It's actually tough, It's tough in that it's sprawling, it's unfathomable, it's gigantic, it's diverse, there's all kinds of cultures, there's all kinds of industries. You can't peg it, you can't pigeonhole it. You don't know in New York if you're making it on Wall Street or Madison Avenue, or you're in lower Manhattan and you open a 300 square foot gallery that puts a couple of stick figures on the wall, and you get someone to come and blog about it. You're winning. Here you can just get consumed by the vastness of it all, and you have to have. I think it helps to have a healthy sense of yourself, and the less you judge here, the less you get judged. Really, we're really talking psychobabble now, but it's just, I find that open-mindedness gets rewarded here. Lack of preconceptions and prejudices and things like that actually gets rewarded here. As I've told people before, I've lived in New York, I've lived in DC, I've lived in the Bay Area, I've lived in Florida, I've lived in Colorado, I've lived in Ireland, I've lived in Pittsburgh, I've lived in, everywhere.
It goes on.
It goes on and on. And the best conversations I've ever had are here with people. The smartest, the most invigorating, as Laurie was saying, the most optimistic, really, in a lot of ways, because you can either be really a downer, bummer, about the future and hide your head in your sand a moment, or you can, be optimistic and energetic about it. And there's a lot of that optimism and energy, I think, here for whatever reason. Just, yeah.
I think the vastness that could be seen as a negative by some people is what makes it so exciting to be an editor here. I mean, there's so much that's been unexplored still. There's so many stories here and so many new people coming who are telling their stories in different ways. One of the things I've always wanted to do, no matter where I was editing, was to surprise people. And that's one of the things that we really love to do here. When I was editing the weekly, I wanted the covers to always be different and not be predictable. I went there, part of my mission when I first got there was to make the LA Weekly a lot less predictable and not just a knee-jerk liberal kind of paper, still wanting it to be grounded in liberalism, but to approach those things with different perspectives. And I just want people to, whenever they see Slake or whatever I've been editing, I want to say, I wonder what they did this time. That's one of the questions I want them to ask. I wonder what they did this time, because they have that kind of excitement and that eagerness to pick it up, because it's not going to be the same from time to time, but always will be grounded in quality writing and storytelling.
If you've just tuned in, this is the Marketplace of Ideas, and I'm Colin Marshall. This week I'm talking with Laurie Ochoa and Joe Donnelly, founding editors of Slake, the new Los Angeles literary magazine, but also a magazine of visual art, photography, essays, reportage, and more. If you want to sign up for the weekly Marketplace of Ideas mailing list, it is as simple as going to colinmarshallradio.com. Instructions are there on the Marketplace of Ideas front page. Plus, if you'd like access to the complete Marketplace of Ideas interview archive, you can download them all right there at colinmarshallradio.com or on iTunes. Just search for the Marketplace of Ideas in the iTunes store. Now back to the conversation with Laurie Ochoa and Joe Donnelly of Slake on the Marketplace of Ideas. Cultural conversation of the depth you demand. This gets at a source of endless richness for an enterprise like Slake, and also a reason that I gave to people who would ask, why would you want to move to LA? It's that, and this is what I said, I'm still figuring out if it's true, but that LA is more of a microcosm of the world than any city that I've been to. Do you think that it actually is that?
Just demographics would bear that out. If you want to look at any demographic study about the population makeup here, that would certainly bear that out. But, having spent a lot of time in 4 years in the Bay Area and 4 years in New York and stuff before that, I think those, as large and, exciting as those cities are, they're kind of easy to figure out in a lot of ways, and one of the joys of Los Angeles is that I think it's a constant process of discovery. It's so, even in my neighborhood in Echo Park, when I go walking around with my dogs and stuff and open my eyes, I discover new things on the same path all the time, like on the same route. And the city is like that. Laurie and I sometimes drive around when we're coming back from our distributor, and we go into other neighborhoods that we, don't go to every day and eat, and it's just so much fun. There's just everywhere's popping, it's just popping with life, even, the neighborhoods might be poor in some areas, and they, the media might cover them as marginal places, but you go there and these neighborhoods are popping, they're just popping with life. They're popping with life the way, the world is popping with life. And it's really fun, it's really fun to embrace that.
Even the
Ray Blanco.
Even the neighborhood where our office is now, where we moved in recently, is a neighborhood that's being created as we, move in, and as other people move in around us. This Atwater crossing space is an attempt to create an arts neighborhood. in a part of the city that hadn't seen that developed yet. So it's that's even possible, that there's space to develop, that people are coming and taking a chance and coming to here and are excited to be here. That tells me that, this city is still open to all kinds of people and all kinds of ideas.
In just picking up any one of these 3 issues of Slake, I think anybody, even especially an LA resident, will discover a new neighborhood or something about a neighborhood that they've ignored. And how much of an explicit priority has that been to get the areas across that people who would pick up a literary magazine in Los Angeles might ignore or might just not think about much, or even if they live there?
It just happens.
We're
not self-conscious about that. It's just things are pretty organic. We're working on trying to get the best stories and the best art and the best poetry and the best photography we can get. Somewhat loosely related around our themes, but there's no white man's burden going on here.
We like it when it happens, and I think there are times where we'll hold back pulling the trigger on the issue, waiting for the perfect mix of stories. But it's not something that's, we need to cover this part of the neighborhood of the city that we haven't covered. It's just, but when that mix is right, when it feels right. And sometimes we argue about when that trigger should be pulled, but there are times of waiting for the right mix. And I think that's important.
Tell me about then some pieces that have surprised you. I'll leave it like that, open.
Well, there's so many. If I want to pull some things out of my hat, in issue 2, Elizabeth Banicki's piece on the race, the other side of racetracks, was, I think, really wonderful and surprising and interesting. Joseph Mattson has a piece in this issue, memoir, about his experience in Little Tokyo when he lived there. Sam Slavic has a great piece of fiction, and we didn't know him as we knew him as a journalist primarily, and he turned in this short story, and it was like an immediate, it needs work, but yes, this is shit. I mean, I'm just on issue 2 right now. I'm looking at Matthew Fleischer's piece about walking to Mecca, California. Is just it's going to be one of those ones that you're going to come back to and want to read forever. It's.
I mean, in the first issue, I think the very first piece that surprised us and that made us happy that we were doing this was Erica Zora Wrightson, who wrote a piece called Artichoke about her mother. And it was, I had worked with Erica. She had been my assistant at the Weekly, and, I knew she was a good writer, but this piece was kind of a breakthrough piece, and that made me really happy. In the third issue, we had worked with Sandow Burke as an artist, and he'd done covers at the Weekly for us, and he was the
internationally famous artist, yeah,
and was. One of the first artists we turned to for our very first issue. But in our third issue, he gave us a piece of fiction that's beautifully done and, makes Joe very jealous because he's an artist and he can write.
Yeah, and he's a great surfer too. Yeah. F him.
Yeah.
And then there was Luke Davies' piece in the first issue that really turned us on. It was exactly like what we were looking for. It's a piece about this cult movie, Cisco Pike, starring Chris Christopherson, but it's so he uses it as a metaphor for so many things, for growing up, for nostalgia, for dreams deferred, for real, and then for embracing life as it is. And it's just such a wonderful, wonderful piece of writing. I think it's worth the price of admission to that issue.
In fact, I am teaching a class at USC in criticism, and I use that piece as an example because so many people want to write so many people want to write first-person pieces, and they're not always that great at it, especially in criticism. But Luke has that perfect balance of showing, some of the aspects of memoir, but really tying it into critical thinking and looking at Los Angeles and what draws people here, and also looking at the movies and television and culture. It's a really beautifully done piece of cultural criticism, memoir, and just writing about Los Angeles in a really fun and beautiful way.
Sort of perfect. And, John Albert in the first issue, we got to do this piece. Laurie and I had been hounding him for a while to do, called the Hep C generation.
Right.
And, we're kind of on the, now it's sort of funny that piece was sort of on the cusp of a lot of growing interest in hepatitis C as a disease and as an epidemic and how to treat it and where we go from here. It seems like it's ubiquitous that people are talking about that now, but that was a really gutsy piece, and he had been resistant to doing it for a while, and somehow we finally got him over the edge to do it. And I think it's a really wonderful, empathetic piece and fun too. I mean, that's the thing, is none of this stuff has to be dour, as you said before. You can deal with heavy issues and have fun with it, just like life,
That gets into something especially striking I found about the issues of Slake that I've read, all three. And it's that the pieces like that one, the Hep C generation, it's, as you said, it's fun. And there's also this just strong darkness underneath it as well. And this is something that I find in a lot of the pieces in Slake, all entertaining, all, whether you're thinking about just the writing or whether, you're thinking about, are they funny? Do they move? Yeah, that's, all can be true, but many have that that darkness immediately underlying them, and I like that a lot. Is that something? Was that deliberate? I mean, or is it just the tastes that form Slake that happen to be also my tastes?
I think it's just the way we are. We keep joking that we're going to have a Get Happy or comedy issue or something, but right. I mean, there's a lot of gallows humor going on, and I think that's fitting for the times, but it's kind of just, it's in our personal makeup as well.
It might be. We had a great piece by the comedian Lauren Weedman in our second issue. Yeah. But there's an element of darkness in that. But I think that it might be something that just reflects the time, and it's not something we purposely go after. We might be drawn to it.
Look at this cover. This was a big hit. This cover,
yes.
Like the
black and
everyone
white.
Stay inside and draw the blinds cover.
Right. For those who are not sitting right here in the room and are listening to this, it is my favorite cover of the three. It's got that Super Burger sign. What neighborhood is this in?
Altadena. Yeah. And they took the sign down just after we went to press. They've changed it, and it's a much more conventional sign now, but it's a beautiful sign.
This sign looks like it dates from 60, 62.
It's from Googie. It's pretty Googie architecture, but
it's full of bullet holes. Also, that's one more thing. Why is it full of? I mean, who would shoot? I don't.
Poor Super Burger.
Maybe unsatisfied customers, but But we called it. This is our Black Album number 2.
But it's a great picture by Michelle Pullman, and we put it. But remember our first issue was a very blue sky issue.
Yes,
yes. And now we're fighting back with War and Peace. So.
Yeah, our first one was full of light and optimism and defiance, and then our second one was. We're depressed. And our third one was, we're kind of in between. We're fighting, and yeah.
I can't let go of the Super Burger sign because it's emblematic in a way of what I like about LA. A lot of what you find
gets it.
Yeah. I going around down here, I see
met with a universal thud.
Really? Oh, well, we'll talk about it.
No, it's still selling and selling well, but it wasn't like people went apeshit for this.
For the bright still life cloud palm tree first cover, but the sign, the Super Burger, it's like it evokes a lot of the great old signs I see in LA. This is a wonderful old sign town. and a wonderful food town. I imagine the burgers are pretty good there if the place is still going.
It looks good, doesn't it?
It looks good, but you'll notice the G is kind of broken, so it looks like Super Burger. It's kind of surreal, and then there's the bullet holes, so there's very much the light and the dark. And when people would, again, be aghast at me for why I would want to move to LA from Santa Barbara, where everything is nice, air quotes, I would say because sometimes when I was feeling just like pissing somebody off or going to the dark side, I would say because there's bad things in LA, because there's the yin and yang, there is the darkness, which you see in a lot of the stories in Slake. As I mentioned, there's great stuff, there's smart stuff, there is nice stuff, there's also violent stuff, tacky stuff, and dumb stuff. And I want to be around that stuff too. Having that removed and leaving only the positive, you can't have one half of the yin and yang, right? Is this too highfalutin or is this sensible?
The cover is crossing over as the theme, and this photo is emblematic of, an idealized, if there's ever an idealized time in Los Angeles, it's probably in the 50s and 60s, and this photo is emblematic of it. And it's interesting that there are bullet holes and it's a little tattered and I don't know if they're bullet holes, but
they sure look like it.
They're pock marks. It's weathered and worn, yet it's still standing. I think it all works. It's crossing over into the future, and hopefully there will still be super burgers to come with us, but. It evokes both the future and the nostalgia of the past, and it tries to, sort of deal with all of that and say, hey, it's gonna be okay,
I think even in, Hollywood's heyday, even back to the 30s and 40s, there's always been an element of faded glamour that people have been drawn to, even as things were being built up. There's still that tawdriness and, and Evelyn Waugh writing about Los Angeles and the loved one has a very, mixed experience of it. But it's a great, that's part of what we like. We don't take ourselves too seriously all the time. There's always something to remind us that, there is tawdriness around the corner, But then we get all excited about something else that's shiny and bright, and there's always something new to discover too.
I mean, when you see the cover and you have this sort of a bit of nostalgia as weathered and worn as it is, then you open it up and this is emblematic of where we are now. This is just
got an aerial shot there, stark black and white,
the sprawl and. To me, this is just as exciting and inviting and intriguing as that. Right. I want to get into both of them. I want to get up into both of them.
It's funny because, I mentioned the interview with John Raby that I did. I was asking him, because he was talking about coming from a place so different to LA. And I was like, well, how did you get a handle on it? How did you think about it? How did you get it in your mind? Because with a place like this, as you know, that's always a fascinating question for people who arrive. And he said, you got to go to a high place. You got to get high on LA, whether it's from an aerial shot or standing on over the observatory. But I want to get a sense of, and how to put this, keep it as down to earth as I can. But how many do we have as many ways to think about LA as we have stories in Slake? I mean, is it a city that you find that no two people have the same approach? We haven't
covered LA, if that's the way of reducing your question.
I don't mean have you covered all the ways of seeing LA, but is every story in these three issues, fiction or nonfiction, are they all different mindsets in which LA gets approached? It seems that way to me. It seems like no two contributors are looking at the city precisely the same way. And maybe that's a simple point. Maybe it would be true for anywhere. But it seems like a lot of them are almost looking at different cities entirely.
A lot of times. I mean, one of the things we do love is working with different voices. And that is one of the aspects about Los Angeles. And what I was getting to before a little bit with saying how it's a great place to edit because you can surprise people a lot, you do come across people who suddenly come up with a different way of looking at the city. At the same time, I think it's a hard to define thing because there is at the core a way of looking at Los Angeles, so that in an issue, in our first issue, we had a piece that was totally set in Mexico City, but it was written by Daniel Hernandez, who had spent many years living here. And even though there might have just been one tiny reference to Los Angeles, there was this sense the neighborhood he was drawn to, which is nicknamed as New York, even though it supposedly has ties to New York, actually had more in common with Los Angeles, and that whole desire to drive. He'd been living in the center of Mexico City, where you don't really need a car, and suddenly he was in a neighborhood and he recognized the grid and he really wanted to drive. And there's just, so even though his voice is very different from others in the issue, there is a way of looking at Los Angeles that just, it's hard for us to define it for you, but it's sort of like we know it when we read it, and it's that kind of something about it that we're drawn to. And
I think one of the things if we try and be on guard about anything is not to have a predictably liberal bourgeois, boho approach to what we're doing. And I mean, I think that comes naturally to us. I'm really not a WASP, and neither is my partner. We have enough street sense to know what's up, but we're not having that distant approach. This isn't an anthropological undertaking. It's where we live, how we want to live, what we want to see, what we want to do, what we want to experience. And we still have a long way to go to widen our reach, but we're not East Side, we're not West Side, we're not Valley, we're not, only in this side of the hill. We're trying not to be as much as possible. And we don't look down our noses at any place, and we don't stare in, wonder and awe and incomprehension at any place either, That's really, and, a lot of that is that we're as experienced and mature. I'm trying to find polite ways to say old. But there's something about being an adult, that is liberating and freeing. You can, I think after a while, you can sort of free yourself from your prejudices and your sort of simple one-dimensional appreciation of things.
Something you said about distance, I just realized I'm constantly telling writers to not write from a distance, to really get in there. My favorite way of approaching things is when a writer will take us, into the moment where I want to know what it's like to be where that writer is. I want the writer to take us there. And that's one of the things we do push for, because too often the tendency is to tell people something instead of showing it, and to do it too much from a distance. And it's something that's fairly common, and there's just small shifts you can do to bring the reader with you. And that's the most exciting part. And then, so if you can bring the reader to show them parts of the city or just ways of thinking, then that's going to be the best kind of storytelling.
Just tuning in, this is the Marketplace of Ideas, and I'm Colin Marshall. My guests this week are Laurie Ochoa and Joe Donnelly, founding editors of Slake, the new Los Angeles literary magazine that isn't just fiction and poetry, it's also photography, visual art, essays, reportage, and more. If you want to hear the show again when the broadcast is over, visit colinmarshallradio.com, where the podcast version is archived, or you can find it on iTunes. Just open up the iTunes store and search for the Marketplace of Ideas. Whether on iTunes or on colinmarshallradio.com, you'll have complete, easy, free access to the Marketplace of Ideas interview archive. If you want to stay updated on all things Marketplace of Ideas, sign up for the Marketplace of Ideas mailing list. All the details, and they're very easy to follow, are at colinmarshallradio.com. That is COLINMARSHALL radio.com. Now back to the conversation with Slake founding editors Laurie Ochoa and Joe Donnelly on the Marketplace of Ideas, a cultural conversation of the depth you demand. Now, Laurie, you mentioned Daniel Hernandez, his pieces about Mexico City and Slake, and listeners will know him from a few months ago on this show talking about Mexico City as well. And in this new issue, War and Peace, the third issue, there's more venturing out of LA's boundaries than in the previous two issues combined, I would think. Tell me, how do these adventures outside of the city that we have in this third issue reflect light back on LA, or how do you think of their connection to LA?
Well, I always think of it back when I was in college and was going to Cal State Fullerton and would see the Orange County edition of the LA Times, and and there was that effort to localize everything. Everything had to be local, and as much as you do want to know about what's happening in your own neighborhood, you also want to know what's happening in the world at large. So I resented, I wanted both. I didn't want just the Orange County edition. I wanted the LA edition too. And when they would substitute stories, it would make me very angry. No. And I think a lot of people in Los Angeles, they want to know everything about what's happening in their neighborhoods, in the area around them. That's part of the stories that are around them. But we look out a lot to the world. We don't just think inwardly. And the way I've always approached local stories is to think of them as national stories, as international stories, because I think what happens here is a national story. It is an international story. I don't want to approach in a small way. I wanted people to think big about them. So there are going to be times where we're going to go beyond the borders of the city, but it still is a Los Angeles way of thinking, out of those borders. So, when we sent Natasha Vargas Cooper to Madison, Wisconsin, to look at what was happening with the unions and what Governor Scott Walker was doing, it was very much with the thought that, unions are important in Los Angeles and it's a part of the fabric of the city. And something's happening in a different part of the country that may have ripple effects how we're living here in Los Angeles. And Natasha had worked with unions here in Los Angeles and in Washington and all across the country. And so she had a great perspective of being from Los Angeles, but being able to look at that story in an intelligent way. And also just to have the fun of having she also writes great pop culture criticism. Mm-hmm. And so she could combine the seriousness of having the experience of being a union worker in Los Angeles with great writing skills and humor, and was able to bring a story that just wasn't knee-jerk liberal reaction kind of piece that had really strong political points to make, but told it in a way that was really fun to read. We learned about, the young state senator Chris Larson and meeting him outside of Six Flags, and it's a great way of seeing another part of the country, but through LA eyes.
Yeah, I mean, Los Angeles has a long and rich history of labor activism, and what's going on there is entirely relevant to here, and also seeing what's going on there through the perspective of someone from here is and it's enlightening and enriching for everyone, not just our local audience, but we feel like Slake is from Los Angeles, but for the world. That's the way we look at it. So the mere fact that, we have smart, intelligent voices that are based in Los Angeles, going out into the world is good enough reason for us, Also, like the piece on Braddock, Pennsylvania, that ties in a lot of ways to Gregory Bjarkus's piece on East LA, which of course I can't find right now. But it's a way of saying, look, these experiences are, you can change the geography and you can change the last names, but these experiences are happening everywhere. The struggles and challenges of neighborhoods on the brink, trying to stay afloat, or they're all over. It's fun to look back and forth that way. Sandow Burke's piece is set in El Salvador during the Civil War in the 80s, but there's so many ties between that and Los Angeles. The whole generations of Salvadorans have lived here because of that strife, and it's interesting to have someone sort of travel into that world for us and kind of bring it back with us. And hopefully the point of all this stuff is hopefully to increase understanding and empathy, and better, sometimes say, and better citizenship.
And indeed, even the pieces that you could call LA reportage in these issues have a universal outlook or appeal to them. And of course, there's also personal essays and fiction and poetry. And, I want to get a sense of the idea of LA literature, because maybe this is just on my mind, because recently I wrote an article myself for the literary site The Millions about alternative LA novels. And I was thinking, what's important?
What are some of the novels you discussed?
Vanessa Place's La Medusa, Steve Erickson's Amnesiascope, Mark Norman's Bike Riding in Los Angeles, and Christopher Isherwood's Single Man, obviously, and another, Karen Tay Yamashita's Tropic of Orange. So listeners, themillions.com if you want to read that. And I thought a lot about what is LA literature. I don't know if I came to any conclusions, but I'll ask you to, not what is LA literature, but what personally do you find are important qualities in the LA literature you want to include in this magazine, or that you want to see rise to the top of the literary consciousness here? What qualities, just as readers, do you think it needs to have? What qualities need to be there for it to really be the most LA of LA literature?
It has to mention the Santa Ana winds. It has to say something about the smell of night blooming jasmine. And it has
it
has to be a Steely Dan song. That's the end of it.
It has to, somewhere Jacaranda has to be it. No, I'm actually poking fun at the usual tropes, but I think if I could just say something personally, I think if there's a strain that runs through any of this, it's coming to terms. It's like you have to come to terms. If there's a strain in LA literature, it's coming to terms with maybe the gap between your hopes and dreams when they were what they were and reality, and then the adult process of coming to terms with that and moving on and doing what you can with that. I mean, I think that's a sort of a fairly consistent theme in Los Angeles literature. And one of the things I actually like about LA literature too is if there's a hard-bitten aspect to it, it's just that the hard-bittenness is that you have to come to terms with your life and reality at some point, no matter what. Everyone does. And it's what you do with that's important and matters, and where, heroism of the hero's journey, takes place. And that, I love that stuff, and you can see that in everything from, stuff as goofy as Michael Connolly or, or Isherwood or, whomever. It's I feel like Fonte, Chandler, it's, the cross genres across, different types of, highbrow, lowbrow. It's in there, and I like that aspect of it, because one thing that the city does do, I believe, is it forces you to come to terms with reality. You have to come to terms with the fact that you're not in Minnesota anymore, where everyone's blonde and blue-eyed. Is that okay to say that? Yeah. Like you.
I'm not from Minnesota, but I know what you mean.
Yeah, and you have to come to terms with you're going to be living amongst people. You're going to have to learn to get along with different types of people. There's going to be dogs barking. There's gonna be some grit, some dirt. There's going to be some struggle, but there's going to be beautiful mountains, and you can go up on top of Mount Hollywood and look at the valley, and you can look at the West Valley, East Valley. You can look south to Catalina, and you can see this wonderful, beautiful place. And sometimes you just jaw drops it, like, whoa, this actually, for as many issues as it has, it's kind of working. Like it's kind of working, and it's kind of a miracle, And I think that's that thing that we have to really make an effort at. It takes a big, open, generous heart to keep invested in that idea that this can work. And not only can it, but it has to.
It's hard to add to that, but I think we don't officially go out looking for this has to be a Los Angeles story. We look first for the story itself. But I think when you first mentioned Los Angeles novels and things, they're just different flashes that come in. Like even the way Steve Erickson flooded Los Angeles with water in Rubicon Beach. I just love that image. I think about it's something that sticks with me, and I think about it a lot. And when Judith Lewis was at the LA Weekly and wrote about hidden streams, I kept thinking about Steve Erickson. So sometimes when a writer can create an image like that sticks with you, I love that. I love Yves Lenoir, and I think about him when I see, houses that's sticking over the edges of cliffs. And I love when a writer can make you think about what you're seeing in the city in a different way, and gives you ways to make connections between those things and give you interesting ideas.
And finally, I want to touch on one last interesting coming to LA story from this program. When David Hewlin was on the show, the book editor at the LA Times, he mentioned coming to LA from New York in like 90, 91, and before doing so, used literature as a means to, as he called it, place himself in the city before he actually geographically put himself in the city. And I found that idea fascinating, and I tried to do it myself to an extent before I moved here. But where do you two put the role of literature, of fiction and essays, of poetry, of photography, of visual art, of the content of a magazine like Slake? Where do you put those things in sort of the toolbox of placing oneself in this city? Can those do the job themselves, or are they one of many ways someone can sort of psychologically get themselves tapped into the city? How do you interpret that whole way of thinking about placing yourself in LA?
Why don't you go first, since I blabbed the whole last time?
I'm trying to think what you're getting at.
It's certainly the broadness of that, the openness of it, is part of what made it interesting. What David said, placing himself. It's like I knew what he meant, but at the same time didn't. Just getting your mind on the same wavelength as a city with literature.
When I first came down here for any length of time, it was to an internship at the LA Times, and I was coming down from grad school in journalism at Berkeley, and of course I started to read City of Quartz, and then I was like fuck that, and put it down. But I did read a lot of the LA Times and the LA Weekly, and when those publications were vital, I think they provided something that a city as large and as difficult to navigate both psychologically and geographically as Los Angeles needs or is helpful, and that's a sense of community, of glue, of common experiences, of shared experiences, things that you buy into, and they can be as simple as the Dodgers, which is of course difficult right now, but has been part of the fabric of the city. The Lakers, surfing, great taco trucks, shared experiences like that. And the Weekly was definitely one of those, I think. And, in the LA Times, and, it was, let's not forget, it was a very good paper for a while at a time. All those things helped. And I think that's part of what publishing magazines, newspapers, whatever they are, can help you feel like you're in it with other people. And these are some of our touchstones. And, Slake is a small part of that. And obviously there has to be more. I mean, I would love to see, a publication like the LA Weekly, come back and be vital in the community. And
so I grew up in Southern California, and Los Angeles was always, just 20 minutes, half hour away from my house in Whittier.
Even when you got to Los Angeles, it was 20 minutes away.
Everything's always 20 to 30 minutes at least, although now it's stretching out with traffic. But, I grew up reading the Los Angeles Times, and at first, the calendar section was an important thing. But then there still was something, I still didn't feel like I knew the city, even though I would come in for theater and everything. It wasn't until I was doing an internship at Cable News Network, the Los Angeles bureau, and found the LA Weekly and found music through there, the music scene and what was happening in independent film. And I really then went to work there and be, at first as an intern, and stayed because, and then went on to the LA Times. But it was to me, it was like getting the keys to the city, and really understanding how politics and music and film all fit together, and in this city. And I really wanted from that point to do that. When I became an editor, I wanted to help people interpret the city and to get excited about wanting to pick things up and help interpret what's happening around. And later I did that through food, and when I became the food editor of the LA Times, and exploring restaurants. And at that time, restaurant culture was developing, and it was as important as certain music scenes. The whole thing about all of that is that there are different subcultures all over Los Angeles too, and the more you dig, the more you look around, there's just more and more things to look at. And so eventually I didn't want to limit myself to food anymore. That's when I came back to Los Angeles from New York, because I was at Gourmet Magazine, but I wanted to think about Los Angeles again. There's so many stories to tell, and I didn't want the filter to just be food, because I wanted to think about it through books and movies and music and politics. And Slake is actually allows us to do all of that and more, and that's what makes it really exciting. And in terms of literature, I think that when writers can explore all kinds of those different subcultures, whether it's Richard Lang writing about a mom in Echo Park, and seeing a little boy killed, or Sandow going off, leaving his job in Los Angeles and going off to surf in El Salvador. I mean, there's so many different ways of approaching all the things that are happening here. And so, literature is just one fabulous way to tell the stories of the city, too.
I've been speaking with Laurie Ochoa and Joe Donnelly, the founding editors of the new magazine of fiction, poetry, reportage, personal essays, photography, visual art, and more. Slake, the third issue, War and Peace, now available. Joe, Laurie, thanks so much for taking the time today.
Thanks,
Thank you. It was fun.
If you'd like to learn more about Slake, visit slake.la. That's SLAKE.LA. This has been the Marketplace of Ideas, and I've been Colin Marshall. You can hear the show again at colinmarshallradio.com, the official Marketplace of Ideas website, or on iTunes. Just open up the iTunes store and search for the Marketplace of Ideas. Either way, you'll get complete, free, and easy access to the entire archive of Marketplace of Ideas interviews. And if you want to stay posted on the newest Marketplace of Ideas interviews, upcoming stuff, changes in the show, sign up for the Marketplace of Ideas mailing list. Go to colinmarshallradio.com, click the Marketplace of Ideas logo to get to the front page, and there are all the instructions, and believe me, they're very easy. It's easy to subscribe, and it's even easier, I would say, to unsubscribe. It's colinmarshallradio.com. Our theme music is produced by Ben Althouse. You can visit him on the web at benalthouse.com. And as well, thanks for tuning in as always, because we want to catch you on the next Marketplace of Ideas for more cultural conversation of the depth you demand.
God bless the child that could find his own.